being feared does work. That is the dangerous part. Fear does make people lower their voice around you. It does make them think twice before crossing you. It does make them obey, retreat, hesitate, and watch their words. And because of that, many people confuse fear with respect. But they are not the same thing. Fear can control behavior. Respect can touch the conscience. Fear can make someone stay quiet in your presence. Respect can make someone honor you even when you are not in the room. That is where this reflection begins. Yes, fear works, but the price it charges is often your peace, your truth, and eventually your loneliness. A lot of people do not become hard because they are evil. They become hard because they are tired. Tired of being ignored. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of being the one who forgives, explains, understands, waits, and gets hurt anyway. At some point, the soul gets sick of softness being treated like weakness. So a person makes a quiet decision inside. From now on, I will not be the easiest person to touch. From now on, people will think twice before disrespecting me. From now on, I would rather be feared than dismissed. And if that thought has ever crossed your mind, then this reflection is speaking directly to you. Because there is a reason that idea feels powerful. Fear gives immediate results. It is fast. It is efficient. It feels like armor. When people fear your reaction, they become careful. When they fear your absence, they become attentive. When they fear your anger, they become obedient. And if you have spent a long time feeling invisible, that shift can feel intoxicating. For the first time, you feel weight. For the first time, your presence changes the room. For the first time, people seem to notice that you exist. But Stoic wisdom asks a harder question. What exactly are they noticing? Your strength, or your threat, your value, or your volatility, your character, or your power to punish? This is where many people lose themselves without realizing it. Marcus Aurelius constantly returned to one core truth: your power begins within. Not in how much pressure you can place on others, but in how firmly you can govern yourself. The person who needs fear to be respected has handed their worth to other people's reactions. Their identity depends on external control. Their peace depends on how intimidated others feel. And that is not strength. That is dependence wearing the mask of authority. Real strength does not need to announce itself with danger. Think about it carefully. If someone obeys you because they fear the consequences, have you really earned their respect? Or have you simply trained their nervous system to avoid conflict? If someone agrees with you because they do not want your anger, do they admire your wisdom, or are they just protecting themselves? Fear can create distance that looks like reverence. Silence that looks like agreement. Compliance that looks like loyalty. But appearances lie. And one of the deepest Stoic lessons is this: never let appearances rule your judgment. Fear creates a kind of false order. Everything seems under control on the surface. People stay in line. They do not challenge you. They do not test limits. But inside that silence, resentment begins to grow. Distance begins to grow. Performance begins to grow. People stop being honest with you. They start managing you. They start giving you edited versions of themselves. They tell you what is safe, not what is true. And slowly, without noticing, you become surrounded not by respect, but by careful actors. That is one of the saddest consequences of living through intimidation. You may gain control, but lose truth. And truth is one of the most valuable things a human being can have around them. Epictetus taught that we should focus only on what is truly ours: our thoughts, our choices, our reactions, our principles. The moment you build your identity on controlling how others behave through fear, you step outside your real power. You start chasing something unstable. You start managing impressions instead of mastering yourself. You start trying to dominate what was never fully yours to dominate in the first place: other people's hearts. You can pressure behavior. You cannot force reverence. You can command silence. You cannot command love. You can create tension. You cannot create genuine esteem through intimidation. And maybe this is the truth many people do not want to hear. The desire to be feared often comes from an unhealed wound, not a healed mind. Sometimes it is a wound of humiliation. Sometimes betrayal. Sometimes years of feeling small. Sometimes childhood. Sometimes heartbreak. Sometimes the exhaustion of always being the one who bends first. A person gets hurt deeply enough that they stop asking, "How can I live well?" and start asking, "How can I make sure nobody ever does this to me again?" That question changes everything. Because from that point on, life is no longer guided by wisdom. It is guided by defense. And defense, when left unchecked, becomes identity. You stop being calm and start being guarded. You stop being clear and start being cold. You stop being disciplined and start being severe. You stop respecting yourself and start performing invulnerability. Seneca warned often about anger because anger feels strong while actually making you easy to control. The same is true of fear-based power. It feels solid, but it is fragile. Why? Because it depends on constant maintenance. You must keep proving you are dangerous. You must keep your tone sharp. You must keep your image intact. You must keep people uncertain enough to remain cautious. And that becomes exhausting. You become a prisoner of the very image you created to feel protected. There is no peace in having to be feared every day. And maybe that is why some of the hardest people are also some of the most internally restless. They look untouchable from the outside, but inside they are constantly bracing, constantly scanning, constantly prepared for disrespect, betrayal, or challenge. They do not rest in themselves. They monitor everything. They manage everything. They carry an invisible tension that never really leaves. Stoicism offers another way. Not softness without boundaries. Not passivity. Not weakness. But calm authority. That kind of authority does not rise from making others uncomfortable. It rises from being so rooted in your own values that no one needs to be threatened for you to remain solid. You do not need to raise your voice to know your worth. You do not need to frighten people to protect your peace. You do not need to become emotionally violent to prove that you are not weak. This matters because many people were taught a false choice: either be kind and get crushed, or become hard and finally be respected. But that is not the real choice. The real choice is between living reactively or living deliberately. Between becoming a product of your wounds or becoming a master of your mind. Between borrowed power and inner power. Borrowed power comes from the fear you produce in others. Inner power comes from the order you create within yourself. One disappears the moment people stop being afraid. The other remains even when you stand alone. If this reflection is reaching something real inside you, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Sometimes one honest message arrives at the exact moment someone needed it, and your small action helps that happen. There is another uncomfortable truth here. People may fear you and still not value you. They may fear your reaction and still secretly pity you. They may follow your rules and still feel no admiration for your character. Because respect is not born from pressure. Respect is born from consistency, restraint, clarity, courage, and self-command. It is born when people can feel that you are not ruled by every emotion that hits you. It is born when your presence brings order, not anxiety. It is born when your boundaries are strong, but your spirit is not cruel. Cruelty is not strength. Emotional unpredictability is not authority. Coldness is not wisdom. And intimidation is not the highest form of protection. The Stoic does not ask, "How do I make them fear me?" The Stoic asks, "How do I become someone who does not need fear to be secure?" That is a far more difficult path. Because it requires you to confront the pain underneath the mask. It requires honesty. It requires restraint. It requires healing. It requires you to admit that maybe the harshness you call strength is sometimes just pain that never learned how to speak gently. And that realization can sting. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how often the desire to dominate appears right after a moment of insecurity, right after shame, right after rejection, right after feeling overlooked. The ego says, make them afraid. Wisdom says, understand why you need that. The ego says, harden yourself. Wisdom says, govern yourself. The ego says, control them before they can hurt you. Wisdom says, no one can truly rob you of yourself unless you abandon yourself first. That is where real respect begins, not in the eyes of others, but in the way you carry your own mind. When you respect yourself deeply, you stop needing dramatic proof of power. You stop chasing the look of control and start building the substance of it. You speak less, but with more meaning. You react less, but with more intention. You threaten less, because you do not need to. Your energy becomes clean. Your boundaries become clear. Your presence becomes steady. And people feel that steadiness. Not as fear. As gravity. That kind of respect lasts longer because it is not built on intimidation. It is built on truth. And truth always stands longer than performance. If one line in this reflection hit you harder than expected, write a single word in the comments that captures what you felt while hearing it. Sometimes one word reveals more than a long explanation. Part 1 ends with this thought. Being feared may protect your image for a while, but only character can protect your soul. Fear can force distance. Only wisdom can create real dignity. And if you are tired of carrying the heavy armor of hardness, maybe that is not weakness. Maybe that is the beginning of seeing that the respect worth having is never the kind you have to extract from people by force. The problem with becoming feared is that, after a while, you no longer know who is truly with you. You start confusing distance for admiration. You start confusing careful behavior for loyalty. You start confusing people's restraint for love. But fear does not create closeness. It creates calculation. It teaches people to study your moods, to predict your reactions, to avoid your edges. And the more they do that, the less real they become around you. What you receive from them is no longer honest presence. It is self-protection. That is why fear can make you feel powerful in public and deeply alone in private. Because the soul knows the difference. The soul knows when someone is with you freely and when they are only staying within safe distance. The soul knows when silence means peace and when silence means tension. The soul knows when obedience comes from trust and when it comes from anxiety. And even if your ego enjoys the illusion of control, something deeper in you remains unsettled. Something deeper knows, this is not respect. This is management. And management is not connection. A stoic mind pays close attention to what something costs, not just what it produces. That is one of the great mistakes people make in life. They judge a strategy by its immediate result, not by its long-term effect on the soul. Yes, fear can produce short-term order. Yes, fear can reduce disrespect. Yes, fear can create a sharp image that others hesitate to challenge. But what does it do to your inner life? What does it do to your peace? What does it do to your relationships? What does it do to your ability to be known, trusted, and understood? If the result is constant tension, then the victory is not as clean as it first appeared. This is where Stoicism becomes uncomfortable in the best possible way. It refuses to flatter the ego. It refuses to call every hard reaction strength. It refuses to celebrate every emotional wall as wisdom. Stoicism asks you to look beyond the surface and ask a more honest question. Am I becoming admirable or merely difficult? Am I becoming disciplined or just emotionally inaccessible? Am I protecting my peace or am I punishing the world for what wounded me? Those are not easy questions. But they are necessary. Because many people do not notice when self-protection slowly turns into pride. They do not notice when boundaries become contempt. They do not notice when emotional control becomes emotional absence. They do not notice when dignity becomes performance. And in trying so hard not to be hurt again, they build a life where nobody can reach them, not even the good things. That is the hidden tragedy of fear-based living. It can keep pain out, but it can also keep meaning out. You cannot build a peaceful life through permanent hostility. You cannot create inner order through outer intimidation. You cannot heal by becoming a person who must always be prepared for battle. Even when no one is attacking, your body remains tense. Your mind remains alert. Your heart remains guarded. And over time, that constant state of defense begins to feel normal. You stop calling it pain. You start calling it personality. But not everything that feels familiar is healthy. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself again and again about restraint, patience, and self-command because he understood something most people never learn. The real enemy is not the rude person, the dishonest person, the disloyal person, or the disrespectful person. The real enemy is the part of you that becomes chaotic in response to them. The part of you that forgets your own values the moment life becomes unpleasant. The part of you that says, since the world can be harsh, I must become harsh first. That instinct is understandable. But it is not noble. There is a difference between being unafraid to set boundaries and needing people to tremble at the thought of crossing you. One is clarity. The other is insecurity trying to look invincible. One comes from self-respect. The other comes from emotional memory. Old pain still deciding who you think you need to be. And old pain is a poor architect for a peaceful life. A person ruled by old pain often believes they are being realistic. They say things like, this is how the world works, or, people only understand force, or, if you are too kind, they will walk all over you. And sometimes those statements feel true because they come from real experience. But Stoicism never said to deny reality. It said to face reality without becoming morally deformed by it. That is a huge difference. It means you can see the world clearly without letting bitterness become your philosophy. It means you can understand human weakness without making cruelty your method. It means you can protect yourself without worshipping hardness. It means you can become strong without becoming cold. That is the strength many people never reach, because fear is easier than mastery. Fear is quick. Mastery is slow. Fear is loud. Mastery is quiet. Fear wants effect. Mastery wants truth. And truth takes patience. To become someone who no longer needs to be feared, you have to sit with an uncomfortable emptiness at first. Because once you stop using intensity as proof of power, you may feel exposed. Once you stop controlling every room with sharpness, you may wonder whether people will still take you seriously. Once you stop projecting danger, you may have to confront the fact that much of your image was doing emotional labor for wounds you never actually healed. That can feel like weakness at first. But it is not weakness. It is detox. It is the painful process of learning how to stand in your own worth without manufacturing tension around you. It is learning how to be calm without feeling small, clear without feeling cruel, firm without feeling feared. It is learning that authority does not need drama to be real. And maybe this is where the deepest misunderstanding lives. Many people think softness and weakness are the same. They are not. Weakness is losing yourself to pressure. Weakness is being ruled by every emotion, every insult, every insecurity, every need for external validation. Softness, when rooted in principle, is something very different. It is composure. It is the ability to remain human in a world that rewards emotional damage. It is the refusal to let pain decide your identity. That kind of softness is rare because it requires enormous control. Anyone can become hard after enough disappointment. Anyone can become cold after enough betrayal. Anyone can become sharp after enough humiliation. But to remain deeply grounded, deeply clear, and deeply disciplined without becoming poisoned by your experiences, that is power. Epictetus would remind you that another person's behavior belongs to them. Your response belongs to you. Their disrespect is their failure. Your loss of self-command would be yours. That is why the Stoic path is not about winning every interaction. It is about refusing to lose your inner order in the process. It is about staying aligned with your own character even when life invites you to become someone smaller, louder, harsher, and more reactive. And that is what fear-based respect can never offer you. It cannot offer you character. It can only offer you control. Sometimes temporary control. Sometimes expensive control. Sometimes empty control. But never character. Character is built in quieter places. It is built in the moment you choose restraint when your ego wants display. It is built in the moment you set a boundary without needing to humiliate. It is built in the moment you walk away without needing the last word. It is built in the moment you realize that not every challenge deserves your intensity. It is built in the moment you stop asking, "How do I make them remember me?" and start asking, "How do I remain true to myself?" That is the turning point. Because once you see that the hunger to be feared is often just the hunger to never feel powerless again, you begin to understand yourself with more honesty. And honesty is where healing begins. You realize maybe you were not chasing respect at all. Maybe you were chasing safety. Maybe you were chasing certainty. Maybe you were chasing protection from shame. Maybe you wanted the world to feel your edge because you were terrified of ever feeling invisible again. That realization does not make you broken. It makes you aware. And awareness changes everything. Once awareness enters, you start noticing the old patterns more clearly. You notice when your chest tightens the moment you feel dismissed. You notice how quickly the mind wants to harden. You notice the fantasy of becoming untouchable. You notice the urge to become colder, harsher, more difficult, more impossible to wound. And instead of automatically obeying that urge, you pause. That pause is sacred, because within it, you recover freedom. The Stoics valued that inner gap more than most people understand. The space between impulse and action is where dignity lives. It is where wisdom can interrupt habit. It is where self-respect becomes real. If you can pause before becoming the version of yourself your pain wants to create, then you are no longer a servant to your wounds. You are becoming a ruler of your own mind. That is real authority. Not the ability to silence others. The ability to steady yourself. Not the ability to intimidate. The ability to remain composed. Not the ability to dominate a room. The ability to leave a room without abandoning your principles. If this reflection is helping you see something you had not fully named before, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Quiet truths like this sometimes find people at the exact moment they are ready to hear them. There is also something else worth seeing clearly. People may remember a feared person, but not in the way the ego imagines. Sometimes they remember the tension, the unpredictability, the emotional weather, the feeling of having to be careful. And that kind of memory is not respect. It is residue. It is the mark left by someone who had influence without peace, presence without gentleness, power without inner alignment. But the person who lives with Stoic discipline leaves something different behind. They leave calm. They leave clarity. They leave the memory of someone who did not become chaotic under pressure. Someone who did not need to prove power every second. Someone who could be firm without being cruel. Someone whose silence did not feel threatening, but grounded. Someone whose boundaries did not feel like punishment, but truth. That kind of person is respected not because others are afraid to cross them, but because others sense there is something internally ordered about them. And internal order cannot be faked for long. Sooner or later, life exposes everyone. It exposes the person whose strength is only performance. It exposes the person whose authority depends on intimidation. It exposes the person whose identity collapses the moment others stop reacting with caution. Because if your power depends on people fearing you, then your power was always borrowed. And borrowed power always comes with instability. The Stoic seeks what cannot be taken so easily. A clear mind. A governed tongue. A steady nervous system. A principled life. A soul that does not need constant proof of superiority to feel secure. That is why Stoicism remains timeless. Not because it promises an easy life, but because it teaches a durable way to live. It teaches you not to build your worth on fragile things: applause, control, fear, image, status, emotional leverage. It teaches you to return to what is yours: your judgment, your restraint, your values, your response. And once you begin living from there, something remarkable happens. You no longer need to ask whether being feared works, because that question starts to feel too small for the life you are trying to build. Now the better question becomes, what kind of presence do I want to become? A presence that makes people shrink? Or a presence that makes truth easier? A presence that creates caution? Or a presence that creates clarity? A presence that dominates through tension? Or a presence that leads through inner order? That question matters because the life you build will always reflect the energy you embody. If fear is what you embody, then suspicion, distance, and emotional fatigue will quietly follow. If inner order is what you embody, then peace, dignity, and steadiness will slowly grow around you. And yes, some people may still misunderstand you. Some may still test you. Some may still disrespect you. Stoicism does not promise universal approval. It promises something better, that other people's behavior does not have to decide who you become. That is freedom. The strongest person in the room is not always the most intimidating. Sometimes it is the one who no longer needs intimidation at all. The one who has faced pain without becoming poison. The one who has learned that being feared may control the moment, but self-mastery can transform a life. There comes a moment in every serious life when a person has to decide what kind of power they actually want. Not the kind that looks impressive for a few minutes. Not the kind that makes people hesitate, stay careful, or avoid crossing a line. But the kind of power that still remains when the room is empty, when no one is watching, when no one is obeying, when no one is validating your presence. Because that is where the truth appears. Remove the audience, remove the tension, remove the reaction of other people, and what is left? Peace or restlessness? Clarity or hunger? Self-command or constant inner war? That is the real test. And for many people, this is the moment where the illusion finally breaks. They begin to see that being feared gave them influence, but not peace. It gave them protection, but not rest. It gave them distance, but not dignity. It gave them a strong image, but not always a strong soul. And once that truth becomes clear, something inside begins to soften, not into weakness, but into honesty. Because honesty is the beginning of freedom. The honest person can admit, yes, I wanted respect. But I also wanted safety. The honest person can admit, yes, I became hard. But part of that hardness came from disappointment. The honest person can admit, yes, fear gave me control. But it also made me tired. And that kind of honesty is far more powerful than maintaining an image that no longer serves you. A lot of suffering comes from defending versions of ourselves that are already exhausting us. That is why the Stoic path is not about becoming harmless. It is about becoming unshakable in a cleaner way. You do not have to become passive. You do not have to become naive. You do not have to let people disrespect you. You do not have to smile at betrayal or welcome chaos into your life. That is not wisdom. But neither do you need to become a source of fear to prove that you have learned. The deeper lesson is learning how to protect your peace without poisoning your spirit. That is maturity. To know when to walk away without drama. To know when to say no without cruelty. To know when to remain silent without resentment. To know when to let someone lose access to you without needing them to feel your anger in order for your boundary to be real. That kind of discipline is rare because it asks for something harder than intimidation. It asks for inner stability. And inner stability takes work. It takes work to not react from ego every time you feel unseen. It takes work to not harden every time life disappoints you. It takes work to not confuse emotional numbness with wisdom. It takes work to remain open to truth without remaining available to disrespect. But this is exactly where Stoicism becomes a living practice rather than a quote, a phrase, or an aesthetic. It becomes the daily effort to return to yourself. Again and again. To return to your values when emotions rise. To return to your principles when pride gets loud. To return to restraint when the old version of you wants to make a scene. To return to calm when pain whispers that only hardness can keep you safe. That return is strength. Not once. Not perfectly. But repeatedly. And this matters because life will keep giving you reasons to become more bitter. That part never fully stops. There will always be people who misunderstand you, people who use kindness carelessly, people who confuse patience with weakness, people who only learn through loss, distance, or consequence. Stoicism does not deny any of that. It simply refuses to let those realities dictate the state of your soul. That is the difference between reacting to life and governing yourself within it. Seneca understood that the person who cannot rule themselves will always end up ruled by something else. Anger, pride, insecurity, revenge, image, the need to win, the need to be admired, the need to be untouchable. And once you are ruled by those things, it does not matter how powerful you look from the outside. You are no longer free. Freedom begins when your peace is no longer dependent on making an impression. Think about how much energy it takes to appear intimidating. Think about how much tension is required to stay sharp all the time, guarded all the time, emotionally armed all the time. Even if other people never say it out loud, your nervous system pays the price. Your sleep pays the price. Your relationships pay the price. Your ability to feel simple joy pays the price. Because the body cannot live in constant defense without eventually calling it suffering. And sometimes the real reason a person is tired is not because life is hard, but because their armor has become too heavy. That may be the hidden truth under this entire reflection. Maybe you are not tired because you are weak. Maybe you are tired because you have been carrying a version of strength that was never meant to be permanent. Maybe what once protected you is now exhausting you. Maybe what once helped you survive is now preventing you from living well. That is a painful realization. But it is also a liberating one. Because once you recognize it, you can begin laying some of that armor down. Not all at once. Not recklessly. But intentionally. You can begin choosing clarity over intimidation. You can begin choosing self-respect over emotional theater. You can begin choosing grounded boundaries over fear-based control. You can begin choosing the kind of dignity that does not need witnesses to be real. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you can stop trying to look powerful and start becoming peaceful. That shift changes everything. Because peace has a different energy than fear. Fear tightens. Peace steadies. Fear performs. Peace remains. Fear needs a response. Peace does not beg to be noticed. And when a person becomes deeply peaceful, something interesting happens. They often become more respected, not less. But now that respect comes from solidity, not intimidation. From consistency, not pressure. From emotional maturity, not emotional threat. That is the respect that lasts. Marcus Aurelius did not keep returning to self-command because it sounded noble. He returned to it because it was practical. In real life, the person who can master their thoughts, govern their impulses, and respond with discipline has a power that unstable people can feel immediately. Not because they are afraid, but because steadiness carries its own weight. A calm person with real boundaries does not need to perform danger. Their presence already communicates that they are not available for nonsense. That is a far better kind of strength. There is nothing weak about calm. There is nothing weak about restraint. There is nothing weak about refusing to let pain turn you into someone cruel. There is nothing weak about choosing not to become what hurt you. In fact, that may be the strongest thing a human being can do. Because anyone can repeat pain. Anyone can pass it forward. Anyone can turn disappointment into hardness and call it wisdom. But to break that chain inside yourself, to say, yes, Life has wounded me, but I will not worship the wound. That is a profound act of inner leadership. And that is where respect begins to take on a different meaning. It is no longer about how people respond to you in the moment. It becomes about whether your life is aligned, whether your mind is governed, whether your actions reflect what you claim to value, whether your private self and your public self are beginning to match, whether you can be alone without collapsing into chaos, whether you can be challenged without abandoning your center. That is real respect. And it starts within. If this reflection stayed with you until this point, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And if something here touched a truth you have been carrying for a long time, write one word in the comments that describes what this message awakened in you. Maybe control. Maybe peace. Maybe armor. Maybe truth. Maybe something you have not even fully named yet. What matters is that you recognize it. Because recognition leads to awareness, awareness leads to choice, and choice is where life begins to change. So no, being feared is not useless. It can produce results. It can create caution. It can create distance. It can even create a temporary form of order. But the Stoic asks a deeper question than, does it work? The Stoic asks, what kind of person does it make me? And that question changes the entire conversation. If fear makes you more restless, more suspicious, more performative, more lonely, more dependent on control, then even if it works outwardly, it may be failing inwardly. And what fails inwardly always reveals its cost eventually. But if wisdom makes you calmer, clearer, more restrained, more stable, more self-governed, then even if the world does not immediately reward it, you are building something far more durable than fear could ever give you. You are building a life that does not depend on intimidation to feel secure. You are building a mind that does not need chaos to feel strong. You are building a soul that can remain steady even when life is not. And in the end, that is the greater power. Not forcing people to fear your darkness, but becoming so grounded in your own inner order that darkness no longer needs to lead you. Maybe the true power was never in making people careful around you. Maybe the true power is becoming someone who no longer needs to threaten the world in order to feel safe within it. Maybe the true power is this: to stand firm without becoming hard, to see clearly without becoming cold, to be respected without demanding fear, and to carry yourself with such quiet discipline that your presence speaks long before your anger ever could. Because fear may control a moment, but self-mastery can transform a life. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the strongest person is not the one who makes others tremble. It is the one who has learned how to remain at peace with themselves. Maybe the real victory is not being feared. Maybe it is no longer needing to be.